his background office. So we'll get started. Have two items of business for today. First is final action on House Bill 2658, and we will ask Natalie to give us an overview if she is ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2658 would replace the current list of standard conditions of probation with a new list, and then it would also allow for special conditions of probation.
Very good. Committee, do we have any amendments as it relates to House Bill 2658? Representative Smith has one. I know Colette is online, so I assume that she is participating and can get that kicked out to us. Very good.
Basically what I've done is yesterday I brought up the idea that got it. Okay, the issue became about a law enforcement officer affecting a search per the criteria that's within the bill. Lines 25 through 28 on page 3, 25 through 28, speak to subsection 12, submit to searches of the defendant's person, effects, vehicle, residence, and property by the defendant's supervision officer or law enforcement officer based on reasonable suspicion that the defendant violated conditions of supervision. And then it says, or engaged in criminal activity. The problem that we have with that is, if I'm a law enforcement officer dealing with a person under supervision that I don't know is under supervision, I may deal with them because of suspicion that they're engaged in criminal activity. I may never know that they were under supervision and therefore fail to provide a report to that supervisory officer. Additionally, the issue becomes, as a law enforcement officer, when I deal with somebody, I have to have probable cause, which is another level above reasonable suspicion, before I can search anybody. Now, under this, if you're under supervision, I don't have to rise to probable cause. It's only reasonable suspicion. So we wanted to make sure, I asked Natalie to make sure that we try to figure out a way to take that out of there, or at least remove it so that it becomes cleaner for for a law enforcement officer that's assisting in supervisory duties, okay? By simply striking or engaged in criminal activity, we remove all those questions. Now, part of the concern I think that one of our proponents had yesterday is that actually occurs in law enforcement. But if we simply go with the idea that the defendant violated conditions of supervision, criminal activity is listed in those conditions. Mm-hmm. So it's actually covered there. So all we're doing is striking on line 28, engaged in criminal activity. That's my amendment.
You want to move that amendment?
I will move that amendment.
Very good. Do I have a second? Representative Ressman. Questions? Representative Heiberger.
I have either a advisor or a maker question. I mean, you referenced a requirement of making a report. And I don't see that. I see language that requires the defendant to report, but where is the language requiring officer to make a report? Which section? Next page. Okay, I get it. Page 4, line. Yeah. Got it.
Mr. Chairman, on page 4, subsection D is where we're talking about where the law enforcement officer is required to make that report if they conducted that search pursuant to subsection B12.
Thank you.
Okay, certainly. Additional questions, committee? All right, seeing none, you may close.
I close and move my amendment this time.
Thank you. Committee, all in favor of the Smith amendment, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. The ayes have it. We'll add that to the bill. Back on the bill, committee. Any additional amendments? All right. Do I have a motion as it pertains to House Bill 2658?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee pass out House Bill 2658 favorably as amended.
Thank you. Second by anyone? Representative Wheeler? We have a first by Representative Resman, a second by Representative Wheeler. Any further discussion on House Bill 2658? Representative Wheeler, or Representative French, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've looked at this, and I appreciate the Reform Commission trying to redo the standards, and I know you probably took some testimony from correction officers and court service officers, but I would really like this committee to have had that opportunity also to get their opinion of these new standards and how they see them. So all I can see of this is we're rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, and I actually have removed some of the chairs. So I'll be voting no on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My response is actually somewhat similar to that, but coming to a different conclusion. Based on the testimony, I think that this is designed to do two different things. One is reformat the probation standards so that they're more in line with, current thoughts, current proper procedures as they stand right now. And they very well might do that. I don't know. I'm not an expert in what probation standards should be, and so I don't really have a specific opinion on this. If experts are saying this is the best way to do it, I'm inclined to agree with that. But the second thing that they want to design this to do is to standardize these probation standards or requirements across all courts. And this is the thought that I brought up yesterday, which is I don't see anything in this bill that actually accomplishes that. All it does is change one set of standards to another. That is not a reason for me to vote against this bill. I just think that 3 to 5 years down the line, we're going to come back, or somebody's going to come back and say, hey, we've got 1,000 courts out there in Kansas, and they're all doing 1,000 different things, and here's the new set of standards, and we're going to be right back at it. So again, this is not a reason for me to vote against the bill. I still support the bill, but it doesn't accomplish what they're claiming it to accomplish.
Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can sort of see where that view is coming from, but I think it does, some of the conditions that were raised, I think, do address do what they're intended to. For instance, Section 8, under current requirements, the court may require the defendant to support the defendant's dependence as a probation condition. I think the testimony is that, well, supporting the defendant's dependence is an excellent thing that we want to encourage. It has no relation to whether they recidivate or not, and it could end up having them spend the rest of their term in prison. And so I think that was part of the intent. Now, it may not be as successful as all the proponents purported that it might be, but I would still support it.
Thank you. I think that a couple of things that I might just add to this. It's important to recognize that these are the universal standards that will apply to all people on probation, okay? And it actually directs in page 1, paragraph B, line 32 through 34, in addition to any special conditions of supervision, the court shall impose the following general conditions of supervision. So this is kind of like that bare minimum of conditions that apply to every single defendant, no matter what. So you wouldn't want a dependent care to apply to somebody that doesn't have dependents, for example. I would then also reference back to subsection, or up at the very top, line 10, where it says, nothing in this section shall be construed to limit the authority of the court to impose or modify any special condition of probation, suspension of sentence, assignment, or community corrections. So again, this is laying a basic foundation that applies to all individuals on probation. The court has full jurisdiction to add any additional special regulations, responsibilities, obligations, things like that. And the question came up or was mentioned earlier. Indeed, the special committee, or excuse me, the Criminal Justice Reform Committee subcommittee on supervision did spend the better part of a year meeting with all professionals in this field, as well as corrections, law enforcement. Everybody was involved in the drafting and approval of this bill, just so everybody knows. So I think that the reason that we didn't hear from them in this committee was they probably felt that it had already been vetted in the subcommittee and then in the full committee of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission, so they didn't feel like maybe they needed to be here. But they were certainly available to, as was anybody else. So, Representative Wheeler, did you have something?
Just very briefly, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with what the chairman just said in his explanation. And the bottom line to this is, no matter what is in this bill, a judge is going to do what that judge bloody darn chooses to do anyway. So I'm going to vote aye.
True that. Representative French.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I understand what you said. I just don't want this committee to become a rubber stamp for the Reform Committee. I think we have a right to hear the same kind of testimony that you all do, maybe not to the same extent, but I just don't want to say, okay, this is what the Reform Committee wants, let's do it. I want some details more than just a recommendation from the committee. Thank you.
Fair enough. I also would, and I know everybody in this committee as well as Judiciary got a copy of the Criminal Justice Reform Commission's final report that did detail out a lot of that information as well. But I do understand your point of view, Representative French. Do you have something, Representative Smith?
Well, I don't want to wax philosophical. I really don't. But, you know, I think it's important that we understand that if there were a state out there presently doing something that brought everything down to, say, a 6 or 7% recidivism rate, we'd all go, holy wow, what are you doing? Let's try that. That's not happening. So what's happening across the country is exactly what we did and the hard work that the reform commissions are doing. While I disagree with much of their work and some of their ideas, you still have to come to the point where you're listening to the folks that are observing what is happening in the industry and saying, you know, perhaps that will work. And this is one of those, I think, pieces of legislation where many of those ideas were incorporated. And it's hard for me to bite into a piece of legislation like this without saying, I don't agree with all of this. I think there should be this or that. But again, that's just my personal experience, which does not reflect the national experience, right? So I'm willing to listen to it. I'm willing to try this or that if I can see that there is no obvious damage being occurred and that there is a possibility of benefit. And that's where I'm at with it, and that's why I'll vote for it.
Thank you, Representative. Any additional comments, committee? All right, seeing none, I believe we had a motion by Representative Resman. You may close. Close. All right, committee, all in favor of passing House Bill 2658 out of committee as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? The ayes have it. Representative Heiberger and Representative Carmichael wish to be recorded as aye votes. All right, moving into House Bill 2654. Committee, does anybody prepare any amendments on House Bill 2654? Oh, sorry. May I ask Natalie to give us an overview first, and then I'll ask for your amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2654 would provide guidance to courts on how to determine the best way to have offenders under the supervision of 2 or more supervision agencies consolidated into just having one of those agencies perform supervision duties.
Thank you, Natalie. One question I did have, and maybe you can just enlighten the committee on this. The question was raised to me yesterday if you have one supervision officer supervising over two separate cases in two separate jurisdictions, if that defendant were to need to be arrested for a violation, what jail is that defendant then placed in, or who affects that warrant in that situation?
Mr. Chairman, what I suspect would happen, and we had a conversation kind of about the jurisdiction of the court. So when this happens, and actually current law provides for this, if a defendant moves from the jurisdiction, the court can just transfer supervision and retain jurisdiction over the case, or they can actually transfer jurisdiction over the case to that receiving court, whichever one is appropriate, as long as the receiving court concurs to that jurisdiction. And so if you were in this situation, I suspect if you had a case where the court had not transferred jurisdiction and had retained jurisdiction in that case, if they were brought in on a revocation or something like that, it would go back to the court that has jurisdiction. And so you could have some situations where you have two courts who have jurisdiction over the case because jurisdiction wasn't transferred, and then you could have other cases where it's all consolidated into one court.
Very good. Thank you, Natalie. All right, committee. Any questions for Natalie? Representative, we don't have name tags. Representative Howerton. Why am I blanking out? Because I'm used to looking at name tags. It's just easier that way. Representative.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it was raised to me yesterday. Sorry, my hair's all crazy. Like in a case like Sedgwick County and then Butler County. So Sedgwick County has like 25 officers that handle these. Butler County would have like 4. I think the fear would be that it would all default to Sedgwick County because they have the ability to take care of them more so. Does that play any at all to this law, or will it just be up to the courts? Or that makes sense. I apologize.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Howerton, I think I do understand your question. So what this bill does is really just provide guidance for what the court should do. It kind of provides guidelines, things for them to consider in making that determination. So right now, that exact same thing could happen. You could have a person who is under supervision under both Sedgwick and Butler, and you could have the court in Butler say, hey, we want to transfer jurisdiction, and the court in Sedgwick could take it or could not. And we're not changing that. So if they come to an agreement, then that's fine, then they can transfer jurisdiction. This is just kind of an effort to, one, make those, or have those supervision agencies have a memorandum of understanding about how we're gonna handle dual supervision so that we can try to start consolidating them into one agency, and then tell the court, say, hey, when you are making these decisions, here are the things that maybe you should look at to determine whether it's appropriate to transfer jurisdiction or just supervision or neither.
Okay, thank you. That was the one concern I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions, committee? Were there any amendments on House Bill 2654? All right, seeing none. Do I have a motion as it relates to House Bill 2654? Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee recommend House Bill number 2654. I can't see that way. Favorably for passage.
Thank you, Representative. Do I have a second? Representative French. All right, committee, any additional discussion on House Bill 2654? All right, seeing none. Committee, all in favor of recommending House Bill 2654, or excuse me, why don't you close first and then I'll go there.
I close and move my motion.
I'm all out of discombobulation because I don't have all my assistants here keeping me straight. All in favor of passing House Bill 2654 favorably for passage, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. The ayes have it. Bill is passed. Committee, we are off tomorrow. Oh, Representative Heiberger, Representative Carmichael. Can't forget those two. Thank you. We're off tomorrow, but we do have one more bill to be heard on Monday. So we'll be back here Monday, which will be our last day of committee. Until then, stay warm, be safe. Thank you. We're adjourned.